Hi, welcome to the Desert Blockchain monthly session on Wednesday, May the 26th, 2021. It is 7 p.m. Arizona time. And tonight we're going to be talking about central bank digital currencies, which seems to be a pretty hot topic at this point. I'm going to stop my screen sharing here and see. Sure. Okay. So my name is Jay Carpenter. I'm the founder of Desert Blockchain, and this is our monthly session, which we have on the fourth Wednesday of every month. And we cover different topics that are relevant to decentralization, to blockchain, and in this case, digital currencies in the form of central bank digital currencies, which is and isn't directly related to blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And we'll go into that in just a minute. I would like to thank everybody that's a citizen on tonight. You support the community and the expenses that are involved in putting on these events, and also the Desert Blockchain Camp. And we do not take sponsorships. We're completely community supported via our Patreon account, which entitles you to become a citizen. So I will ask if there are any questions. I am monitoring the chat in the live stream, and we've got quite a few people watching on the live stream. So let me start the presentation. We're going to jump back and forth from the presentation tonight that I prepared for this and into some YouTube snippets that I think are very relevant to what we're talking about, that sort of paint the overall picture. But let's start with the presentation, and I'll sort of step you through this. So what we're going to talk about is what are central bank digital currencies. We're going to take a look at a statement that was just recently made by the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, and it's about 5 minutes long. We're going to watch the entire thing. And then there was an interview recently, about a week or two ago, with Edward Snowden, and he talks about some of the considerations from his lens on central bank digital currencies. And we will also look at a snippet from a 45-minute interview with an author by the name of Richard Turin, who wrote Cashless, which talks about China's central bank digital currency. And we'll probably end up talking quite a bit about China's central bank digital currency, which was recently launched and which has been in the making for about 7 years now. And I think could have a very profound impact on multiple dimensions in the realm of currencies, central banks, sovereignties, trade, so forth. And we'll finish it up with a kind of a general conversation about what might be the opportunities around this and some of the considerations. So I've included in the presentation, and by the way, the citizens received a preview of this presentation, but this presentation will be available to everybody publicly tomorrow morning, sometime after 6 p.m. or excuse me, 6 a.m. But here is a snippet of the Wikipedia page on central bank digital currencies. And this is a pretty good article, and I don't have the entire thing showing, but it does start to highlight a few of the key considerations here, which is part of this movement towards central bank digital currencies has been sparked by the success of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and blockchain, but there's some other dimensions that are at play as well. But right now, there's more than 80% of the central banks in the world are looking at digital currencies. And I would say this is the beginning of some very interesting dynamics for monetary policy, as well as other dimensions of what's at play here. So here is a link to a talk, about a 5-minute talk by Jerome Powell, who's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And I'm going to stop my screen share and go into the another screen share where we can watch the talk by Chairman Powell. It goes well.
Today we are in the midst of a technological revolution that is fundamentally changing our world, reshaping how we communicate, access information, and purchase goods and services. As the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve is charged with promoting monetary and financial stability and the safety and efficiency of the payment system. In pursuit of these core functions, we have been carefully monitoring and adapting to the technological innovations now transforming the world of payments, finance, and banking. The effective functioning of our economy requires that people have faith and confidence not only in the dollar, but also in the payment networks, banks, and other payment service providers that allow money to flow on a daily basis. Our focus is on ensuring a safe and efficient payment system that provides broad benefits to American households and businesses while also embracing innovation. In the Fed's early days, the development of dedicated telegraph wires facilitated the transfer of funds between banks. In the 1980s, automated clearinghouse services made it possible for electronic bill payments to be an alternative to paper checks. In 2019, the Federal Reserve committed to building the FedNow service, which will enable banks to provide real-time or instant payments to their customers around the clock, 365 days a year, benefiting communities across America. Recently, the rise of distributed ledger technology, which offers a new approach to recording ownership of assets, has allowed for the creation of a range of new financial products and services, including cryptocurrencies. To date, cryptocurrencies have not served as a convenient way to make payments, given, among other factors, their swings in value. Nonetheless, coins tied to the value of the dollar or another currency, known as stablecoins, have emerged as a new way to make payments. These stablecoins aim to use new technologies in a way that has the potential to enhance payments efficiency, speed up settlement flows, and reduce end-user costs. But they may also carry potential risks to those users and to the broader financial system. For example, although the value of a stablecoin may be tied to the value of a dollar, these coins may not come with the same protections as traditional means of payment, such as physical currency or the deposits in your bank account. Therefore, as stablecoins' use increases, so must our attention to the appropriate regulatory and oversight framework. This includes paying attention to private sector payments innovators who are currently not within the traditional regulatory arrangements applied to banks, investment firms, and other financial intermediaries. Technological advances also offer new possibilities to central banks, including the Fed. In particular, technology now enables the development and issuance of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. A CBDC is a new type of central bank liability issued in digital form. While various structures and technologies might be used, a CBDC could be designed for use by the general public. For the past several years, the Federal Reserve has been exploring the potential benefits and risks of CBDCs from a variety of angles, including through technological research and experimentation. Our key focus is on whether and how a CBDC could improve on an already safe, effective, dynamic, and efficient U.S. domestic payment system. We think it is important that any potential CBDC would serve as a complement to, and not a replacement of, cash and current private sector digital forms of the dollar, such as deposits at commercial banks. The design of a CBDC would raise important monetary policy, financial stability, consumer protection, legal and privacy considerations, and will require careful thought and analysis, including input from the public and elected officials. To help stimulate broad conversation, the Federal Reserve Board will issue a discussion paper this summer outlining our current thinking on digital payments, with a particular focus on the benefits and risks associated with CBDC in the U.S. context. As part of this process, we will ask for public comment on issues related to payments, financial inclusion, data privacy, and information security. We are committed at the Federal Reserve to hearing a wide range of voices on this important issue before making any decision on whether and how to move forward with a U.S. CBDC, taking account of the broader risks and opportunities it could offer. The paper represents the beginning of what will be a thoughtful and deliberative process. Irrespective of the conclusion we ultimately reach, we expect to play a leading role in developing international standards for CBDCs, engaging actively with central banks in other jurisdictions, as well as regulators and supervisors here in the United States throughout that process. The Federal Reserve remains committed to ensuring that the public has access to a safe, reliable, and secure payment system. Our forthcoming paper on the evolution of digital payments is intended, along with our other work as supervisor, regulator, and payment system operator, to advance the objective of ensuring that the payment system and the economy work for all Americans. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on this important topic.
Okay, excuse me. So we can talk a little bit about Chairman Powell's comments in a moment, but before we do, I'd like to go back to the screen share and show the counterpart to what he was talking about, which is, this is the European, basically, consultation, I believe they call it, regarding their proposals to launch a central bank digital currency around the euro. And it's, you can read the consultation. It's linked here in this slide. Also, one of the officials, this lady talks a little bit about it. One of the interesting things she said, and I included her tweet, was citizens say they would value I told Reuters that the feature citizens say they would value most is privacy, but they don't want such a digital currency to be anonymous. That's a very interesting comment. So again, you can read more in this consultation. Next, we will take a look at Edward Snowden's comments on central bank digital currencies, but I will stop the screen share here and ask if there's any comments before we move on to Mr. Snowden's comments. And I don't see anything in the YouTube comments at this point. Okay, let me resume screen sharing, and we will listen to what Mr. Edward Snowden has to say. This is about 5 minutes, I believe. And
you know, there are all these governments today that I'd like to get your thoughts on central bank digital currencies. I personally,
they're terrible. Yeah, but go on.
Right, exactly. I personally find this terrifying, right? Like, it's completely terrifying. It reminds me of these photos from the Hong Kong protests where there are these huge lines at the subway stations. And people want to pay for tickets in cash because no one wants their electronic purchases to place them at the scene of the protest, which to me really underscores that a cashless society is a surveillance society. So the last thing I want is for all money to be digitally administered by a government. And so what are your thoughts on CBDCs?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many problems that, like, even if we step away from privacy, we know China is trying out their digital yuan, and the idea, like the hot, exciting idea that was being written about in like Bloomberg on this, is that they could issue money that has an expiration date because it's digitally provided, right? They can set the rules on this. They own the wallets. They distribute this. The tokens they create, they can script however they want. And so they go, well, for economic stimulus, we can give a payment, and if you don't use it, you lose it. But simply the idea that anyone anywhere can revoke your money is terrifying. How can anyone say, we're all going back to gold at that point, like digging in the ground and like burying acorns in the forest like squirrels. There's actually an argument to be made for people doing that for thousands of years. That's why sometimes you find caches of buried coins under some house in England. It's because people recognize, for good reason, you have to be able to store value somehow that can't be confiscated, because confiscation is not always just, even if it is legal. And just to respond a little bit to the Hong Kong thing, I think that's a great point, but it also shows where we are really bad at anticipating threats, and we're very bad at scamming things. You go to the subway and you don't want to use cash because you don't want your ticket to be associated with your card that says you went to this protest at this time. Great, makes sense, good idea. At the same time, you're carrying your phone, and there are cell phone towers at the protest site because there's cell phone towers everywhere in the city. And your phone is associated with your SIM card. Your SIM card is associated with the telecommunications company, and the telecommunications company associates that with your payment information. The phone company still knows you were at that protest site because your phone was at the protest site. And the telecommunications company has all of your billing information. They probably have your address and information, and they provide this to the government. In every country, I don't care where you are, telecommunications companies are some of the most regulated entities on the planet. They are always subordinate to the government and entirely dependent on the government for permission to operate their business. And that means they're basically the least reliable partners you can have in protecting yourself, probably only second to banks. So yeah, I mean, this is really the problem. How do we make sure that someone can ride this up? How do we make sure that someone can communicate freely? How do we make sure that someone can publish freely? And also maybe privately, because you can't communicate free, and you can't spend free, and you can't associate freely or do anything freely unless you can do it privately in many circumstances, right? And what are those circumstances? People are like, privacy, privacy, privacy. And I don't think this is true in this conference, that like people poo-poo it. But when you get these sort of walking corpses that are on the op-ed boards of major newspapers around the world, and they dismiss this again because they're bought into the system. They don't realize the value of rights because they need their rights. When you are established, when you are in the majority, when you are representative of especially the powerful segments of society, you don't need the rights because the rights aren't protecting you against anything. You are in the position where you impose your influence on others rather than against yourself so much. And when you have majoritarian positions, when you have majoritarian leanings, none of this really benefits you. Let me cut this short here, but the point is privacy protects the minority against the majority. It's the people who are different. It's the people who are interested in different things, who think different things, who say different things, who buy different things. They are the ones that need the protections of those rights because they're doing something that is fundamentally different than what the system was presumed, or the presumption that the system presumed people would be operating under when it was created. But that's where progress comes from. If we go, well, the system as it is today is great, in which we know it's not. But if we assume it is, and we go, nobody should do anything different. We want to put all these laws in place to make sure nobody does anything different. Great, maybe you will be able to perfectly enforce every law everywhere all the time. Think about how horrible that would be. Think about all the times in history where the law was wrong, and the only just thing to do was to break it. This is the kind of thing that I think people in Hong Kong will recognize. And sadly, if we don't get critical mass, we could end up like that.
So with our
So that is Mr. Snowden's view and take. And he also, in that particular interview, he talks about cash and how cash is actually tracked now. So there are apparently systems that track the serial numbers on cash as it's being counted in a bank, or I assume dispensed via an ATM. So he has some interesting thoughts on that as well. So let me go back to screen sharing. Well, first of all, are there any questions or comments before I go back into the presentation? Let's see. We have a comment from Josh Abbott of ASU Law. It says, I can see how access to public services could be easily controlled, but could a government realistically restrict private transactions to its own digital currency? I don't think we really know yet. And part of the yet to be determined dimensions of this is how the digital currencies are designed. And that's a perfect lead in to the next item that I'm going to share, which is just came across. Well, first of all, before I get into the next item, well, let me go this way. Oops. Uh-oh. Okay, bear with me. Okay, I have not refreshed my version of the presentation, but the current version of the presentation has a talk that I just came across that was just published today by one of the participants at MIT who's working with the Boston Federal Reserve to design the United States cryptocurrency, as well as Perianne Boring of the Washington, D.C. blockchain think tank. And basically, they talk about some of the dimensions of what's being designed. Is the United States cryptocurrency digital central bank digital currency going to be open source? We are going to enter a period of consultation, as Chairman Powell mentioned. So, your question, Josh, about could it be controlled? Well, there's all sorts of things that could be implemented with any one of these digital currencies, and it's yet to be determined. Chairman Powell spoke about being part of a global standardization of some of these digital central bank digital currencies, and that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But the answer is we don't know. As Edward Snowden mentioned, these currencies could basically expire, and that could play into the monetary controls that the central banks have, like the Federal Reserve and so forth. It also is coming up in terms of the recent, stimulus distributions through the COVID pandemic. It's generally perceived that the digital currencies issued by the central banks could have much greater ability to fine tune and to speed up the process. So I won't go into that too much at this point while we're still going through the presentation. But what I would like to point out is that there are multiple competitive dynamics that are really turning up the volume on this conversation for central bank digital currencies. I think it was sparked, part of it was sparked by the success and popularity of the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And certainly in 2019, when Facebook started the launch of their Libra, which is now called Diem, that basically awakened many of the policymakers and so forth. So that's one dimension. But now, as we're going to see in this next segment, the sovereignties are starting to compete with one another as to who can design the best and the most powerful central bank digital currencies. So this is a talk that I came across by Richard Turin, who's an author who's written China's Digital Currency Revolution, Cashless. And I will stop the screen share here, and we will play the interview with Mr. Turin, which will last about 5 minutes. And here's what he has to say.
Absolutely. Now, let me add another dimension to this, which is, again, I'm just starting to see it covered. It's a critical part of my book.
Okay.
I'm just starting to see it in the news, finally. And that is the digital RMB is not just a currency. Many analysts think about it as, well, it's money. It's no different than any other money. And that's wrong. The digital RMB is an entry ticket or an entry token into something new. And the new thing, it is China's digital logistics network. So China, using 5G, using blockchain, using many new technologies, is designing a system, and it's already in place in China. It's now expanding, which will allow you to purchase something digitally, and it will, you can buy your container full of refrigerators.
Mm-hmm.
You can document it to customs. You can clear customs. You can get on the container on board the ship. Everything will happen as part of a massive blockchain digital logistics system. So when you are in a BRI country and you push the button to say buy with digital RMB, you'll get a delivery date at your doorstep and you're done. The tricky part is that many in the finance community, and I spent most of my career, 18 years in finance, are simply looking at digital RMB as another form of money.
Right.
And what they're not seeing is that it comes with something very important attached, and that is this digital logistics system, which is already being built, and it's digital trade finance, and it's digital shipping, and it's monitoring where your package is, your container is, from whether it's left the factory to where it is on the road to whether it's on the ship, where in the ship it is. It's really quite remarkable.
It's the whole ecosystem, right? It's not just a new currency. It's the whole system that goes with that currency that's being developed, right? So that's the big difference.
And that's what people are missing.
Right.
It is, and that's really important. And anybody who lives in China today, we get on WeChat, we get on Alipay, we get on JD, or we get on Alibaba, we buy something. I can see where it is. There's a little map. It shows me where it is. I know exactly when that thing is coming to my doorstep.
Right.
You know, it's really, and you have to, and okay, you say, well, that's easy. It's domestic. That's true. But
Right.
that entire concept, the way of thinking, is being ramped up on a global scale. And it's all related to blockchain, which we have in China, what's called the Blockchain Service Network. It's really a transformation into this smart logistics intelligent logistics, which the rest of the world hasn't made yet.
Fantastic explanation, Richard. I really like how you've broken it down for all of us, because I think many viewers, probably not an expert like yourself in this field. It makes it a lot simpler for us to understand. Again, it is not only this new currency, but it is, a new system, a new ecosystem, and everything that goes around that. And you can see how this really, why China has been investing so much. For example, 5G network all over China. Now it makes sense, why that 5G is so important, why they've been developing that network, because it goes hand in hand with all of these projects that they, are working on. What about the global monetary system?
So I think that highlights a really, really powerful dimension of, what is at hand and what is underway with, China. And I'm sure that others are going to start, picking up on that. And, the piece that I mentioned that I don't have in my version of the presentation with Perry-Ann Boring and the woman from MIT, they talk about how the United States is, in their opinion, is behind China, and in fact, substantially behind. So, what Richard Turin just mentioned and highlighted, I think, is a really, really key dimension of this central bank digital currency, that it's more than money. It's part of the fabric of, global coordination. And if you don't know what he mentioned, he used an acronym BRI, which is Belt and Road Initiative. And that is a key initiative by China to create trade channels around the world. And what he highlighted just then was that this central bank digital currency has been designed to be, part and parcel with that BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. So in the talk that I'm not showing, and I'm sorry to kind of tease you with this stuff, but Perry-Ann Boring mentions that China has like 100 patents on this central bank digital currency. And, it is a big initiative that's much, much more than just a currency. So any questions or comments? Okay, we've got another one from Josh. Could a CBDC take on a role similar to how company script was used in old company mining towns, but at a macro scale, giving a government unprecedented control over every aspect of economic activity? I think absolutely. I think, the woman from, I think she goes by Nihai, is her name. She talks about the programmability of the digital currency that they're designing for the United States. And I'm gathering from the Chinese central bank digital currency that it definitely has, programmability, which is probably even more powerful than the script that, you're talking about from, the company script from mining towns and so forth. So, there's some really, really powerful dimensions to this. We don't know yet. We don't know what the anonymity is going to look like. We don't know what the privacy is going to look like, what the, scope of control, all that sort of thing. But, definitely, I think part of what's inspired the central bank digital currencies is they have seen how dynamic, value and money can be in a blockchain distributed ledger realm and context, with the programmability of like Ethereum. And it's just unleashed this desire to create all these powerful dimensions. So I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that there's a whole new tool set here that could be used in ways that we probably can't even imagine at this point. So let me go back to the presentation and we'll finish that up, and then we'll just open it up for conversation. So again, there's over 80 countries that are investigating or launching the CBDCs. The opportunities, I've got this as a placeholder, but I'll come back to this when we're out of the presentation. So this is the section for questions and discussions, and I'll probably add some additional material in here, podcasts. This is how you can contact me, and I will stop the screen share at this point. So the opportunities. I'm not really sure how this can be an opportunity, but if you listen to the entire Richard Turin interview, he says, and others are mention the same thing, that the Central Bank of China is planning to utilize and leverage WeChat and Alipay as their method for having a wallet and for people to be able to manage their Chinese central bank digital currency. So some people were saying, hey, is this going to be the end of WeChat and Alipay and those mechanisms? And no, it looks like it'll actually strengthen those private, well, if you can call them private, apps that are there in China. And it's my understanding that some of the smaller countries, I think the Bahamas issued like the sand dollar, but it wasn't widely adopted. So I think something as ambitious as integrating this central bank digital currency into the Belt and Road Initiative, they have to get this thing adopted, and they have to leverage some of the user experience, user interface that some of the private sector companies have already pioneered and are so good at. So I think there could be some opportunities for private sector players to see opportunities to integrate the central bank digital currency of the United States Federal Reserve, other countries, and so forth. I don't know, but certainly if that could be accomplished, I think that would be a huge, huge opportunity. I think there could also be some opportunities to innovate and experiment with, how do you give the end user control over their privacy, over their anonymity, if it's even available using some of these digital, central bank issued constructs. So that's those are some of my thoughts. I will basically be quiet at this point. I am monitoring the chat in the Zoom, and I'm monitoring the chat in the live stream. So I'd love to hear what other people are thinking at this point, and what are some of your questions? This is really a broad subject. We could talk for a long time on this, but any thoughts or comments?
I can go. So as to whether or not there will be any privacy at all, or whether, how much control the US government would have over the chain, I think it's going to be like unquestionably absolute. Because we can't say for certain now, but we can look at, what the US government has done in the past, particularly with respect to cryptography. So we can look at the 90s, the Clipper chips where it's like, oh, it's encrypted, but the FBI, three-letter agencies have a back door via these chips to decrypt whatever they want to. It's probably going to be something pretty similar, where it's there's some sort of key that the feds control, that basically you don't really have any privacy, and we'll see that kind of. There may be one or two incidents where the bad guys acquire the key or something to that effect, and people's data is no longer private. But the key takeaway, I think, is there's going to be no privacy whatsoever, and even recent events, so like I think highlight kind of the control to which the U.S. government would seek control over the blockchain, because you have the IRS and I believe one or two other financial regulatory bodies going after, for example, Binance, which I forget what country Binance is based out of, but they're going after it essentially for laundering and things of that nature. And it seems to be like they're pulling out the big guns. So I think it's very much given the Clipper chip stuff and like recent actions by IRS and other agencies, you're going to see the government very much want full control, have a bird's eye view into everyone's data. It's going to be basically full control for the U.S. government essentially. So I think maybe the one perhaps arguably useful advantage would be like maybe it's quicker than the ACH. So rather than waiting ACH to take 5 days to clear whatever between banks, it might clear within half an hour or whatever. But I don't think it's going to be from a privacy perspective and just from a you own your own money perspective. It's not going to be very useful. It'll be kind of a joke.
Scott, I consider you to be an expert in the privacy coins and so forth. Do you think the privacy coins, like Monero, are making progress? And let's assume that we have the ability to, continue to use privacy coins like Monero and Zcash. What's your take right now on the future of those?
I think privacy coins do have a place and they do have value. I think probably the easiest example to point to is the darknet markets. I mean, they're not all illicit activity. I would just like to throw that out there, but they're pretty much all Monero only at this point, which means that people do value the privacy, and I can only speak to Monero's GUI and kind of ease of use, but back in 2014 through 2017 there really wasn't a GUI, and 2017 was when the GUI came out, and since then it's improved. But yeah, I think there is value. I think people are starting to recognize it. I think there was even a Goldman Sachs report either today or within the last week that mentioned Monero as a coin of interest, not from like a cap perspective, but from like a more utilitarian kind of perspective. So I think in terms of privacy coins, it's really at this point in terms of adoption and like where it is in the adoption cycle, I think it's really getting past the people who really truly care about privacy, people who deal with, for one reason or another, dark web-based markets, that kind of thing, to getting people to realize that not only is stuff like Bitcoin not useful in the sense of digital cash, because you have $15-20 transaction fees, so it's incredibly expensive to actually spend with, but it's simply not private, period. How long that will take, I don't know, but I think maybe if we see the US kind of create their own sort of digital cryptocurrency, maybe that might help accelerate things, and people will have a better foil to compare privacy coins against, but we'll see, I guess. It really depends on how good the community is at driving adoption.
Thank you. In that piece interview with Edward Snowden, he spends quite a bit of time talking about his call for the Bitcoin developers to add privacy into the protocol. So he addresses that quite a bit in that interview. So, Jim, did you have something to say? Thank you, Scott, by the way.
Well, I do have a question. I know in Richard Turn, when he was speaking about China, said they were working on this since 2014. Any idea how long MIT's been working with the Boston Fed on developing something?
In the interview, the Neha mentions that, and I think they started working on it in like 2019, 2018, something like that. So, yeah, you can watch that interview. It is in the presentation now, and I would recommend watching the entire interview, but it is in that, it is mentioned, the time frame.
So it'd be really key because there's all kind of policy issues to be decided, which will go into the design of the central bank digital currency. There's just so many different ways that it could go. One of the concerns I have is around the government need to track money for tax purposes, and whether it's Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. They're talking about maybe a wealth tax, estate taxes. Well, how do you know who has what? Obviously, the people that have it are going to try to hide it, and the government knows that. So it'll be interesting to see how some of those questions shake out in all this. And the other thing about the Chinese system is, they're really developing an alternative to the current global dollar system. So that'll have some major ramifications as well.
That is mentioned in several parts in almost every one of those pieces that I highlighted, and particularly in the MIT Perry and Boring. They talk about the possibility of this Chinese central bank digital currency eclipsing the dollar as the global currency. So, in terms of the taxes and sorting through blockchains and all that, yes, that's definitely at the top of the conversation today. And I didn't post it anywhere, but I did get an email today, this afternoon, in fact, at 3 p.m. there was a conference or a session that was put on by Stanford University with a company that does blockchain forensics. So there's a whole realm of, folks that are, and this is blockchain forensics for regulators. So I'll post that in the presentation and the YouTube notes, since I'm talking about it now. But and this recent ransomware with the oil pipeline, that I believe the people that launched that were caught, or had to give themselves up because they didn't realize how trackable it was with the Bitcoin blockchain. So anyway, interesting dimensions. We do have a whole bunch of questions here in the chat on the YouTube. Joseph says, what will CDBC do to the price of existing digital currencies? I think that's pretty hard to tease out. I do think that this is just Jay Carpenter's opinion. I think we're basically at a collision point with, centralized constructs and decentralized constructs. And, that's one of these dimensions of competition and the urgency and so forth. So, there's all sorts of rumblings about China wanting to do certain things with the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think that would definitely impact the price of Bitcoin, at least, if not the other proof of work blockchains, because it's fairly well known that, or at least assume that the majority of the mining power is in China. So I think there's all sorts of dimensions. I don't think you can say for sure, but clearly, Chairman Powell, others are talking about this dance between the decentralized, blockchains that are not, controlled by central entities, although that's questionable. But that and the central banks, there's definitely this ebb and flow going on here. So Josh says, I've heard Algorand mentioned as a possible basis for a US central bank digital currency. Is that the kind of opportunity you might imagine? Are there other existing blockchains you've heard mentioned in connection to this? I hadn't heard that Algorand was considered. I believe that the designer of Algorand is with MIT, whose name is escaping me right now. Algorand's a very interesting project, and there is a epicenter.tv session. Silvio Macaulay is the inventor of Algorand. And if Silvio Macaulay is an amazing intellectual, and I think he's won the Turing Award and other awards and so forth, but I could definitely see Algorand is sophisticated enough. It's patented every way you can imagine. I think that could definitely be a candidate for the US CBDC. No, the next question is from Josh is the choice going to be between having a CBDC and not, or between having a digital US dollar versus foreign power, China, EU, others replacing the dollar as the world reserve currency? Well, I think, there are threats to the dollar being the world currency in many dimensions. But at least the party line right now is that these CBDCs are not going to replace, cash. They're not going to replace the existing bank system and so forth. I don't think we're far enough into this that any of that can really be, determined, or you can get any kind of idea at this point. Most of this stuff is on the drawing boards, but I do think that this integration with the blockchain supply chain of China and so forth, that's really, really strong in my view. So, yeah, any other comments, questions, so forth?
Well, in regard to the Chinese system, you can see where it would really be an advantage with the Belt and Road Initiative. But outside of that, who really would trust that? So, I think it'll be limited globally, for at least for the time being. Because they can track everything with that currency the way it's designed. So I just don't, I don't think they really have an interest in becoming the reserve currency for the time being. I think they're trying to develop their sphere of influence through this, and it's kind of down the road, a couple decades maybe, before they can challenge the dollar in a reserve status.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's pretty safe to say, at least from my research preparing for this session, that this is a top priority for China. So, yeah. Anyway, okay, well, we're almost at the end of our time. Any other comments or questions before we wrap it up this evening? I appreciate everybody participating tonight. And our next session will be on, I call it green consensus or eco-friendly blockchains, but it's actually much more than that, because we're going to be talking about Chia Network, which was designed by a fellow named Bram Cohen, who is the inventor of BitTorrent. And we're also going to be talking about Filecoin and maybe some others. But it's an alternative to proof of work. It's called proof of space-time, and it's basically a way to use storage as your path to consensus. You know, can you prove that you're storing data, and, you know, have you stored it for this amount of time and so forth. So that's what we're going to be talking about on June 23rd. There is a meetup session that you can sign up and RSVP for at this point. The other part is that it's my intention, and at least one other person that's part of the Desert Blockchain community, to stand up a Raspberry Pi with a couple terabyte hard drive to do what's called Chia farming. They don't call it mining, but it's farming. And that's an experiment that we want to stand up and work with and get a little more familiar with Chia. So it's not, to my knowledge, it's not possible to do that with Filecoin, because the processing power that's required is like 128 gigabytes of RAM in order to do the math that's associated with Filecoin. But we are interested in doing some experimenting with Raspberry Pi, small board computers, to do, you know, mining, farming, that sort of thing. And I am working diligently to get Desert Blockchain Camp reopened, so that we'll have a place to meet and gather and so forth. So, you know, again, I appreciate everybody's participation, and thank you for being citizens and supporting this community. And, you know, let me know if you've got any other ideas for topics and so forth. And thank you for your input. Okay. Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.